Hey everyone, in a previous video I talked about the 8 ways to convey information so that people actually listen to you. One of those ways is through data. Most people believe that data is objective, so if you have data, the message will just land automatically because data is so convincing. All you need is a couple of charts, a couple of tables, and everyone would get it, right? Well, it's actually not as easy as that. From my years being a business school professor and teaching thousands of executives and MBA students, it's actually quite common for the person who has the best data, the most representative data, the best methodology to end up being ignored. Because the key to communicating well with data is knowing how to use it. And it's such a shame because data actually allows us to get away from non-representative and biasing anecdotes and get at the truth. But if we don't communicate it right, nobody would be interested. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the key steps to communicating data effectively. So the first insight about communicating data effectively is that you're on the clock. Having data is not permission to take a long time to get to your point. What they really want from you when you're communicating data is the 30-second answer, the clear recommendation of what they should conclude from it. Research suggests that people often will not review data almost at all, or at least review it a lot less than they think. For example, one paper finds that people pay for long trial periods for services, like a streaming service, for example, but they make up their minds about these services far earlier than the trial period ends. Another example is another study finds that people write long essays in their job applications, but recruiters read only a fraction of it and make up their minds about the candidates. Even in dating, people think that it would take them a long time to date somebody before they knew whether that person is marriage material, but in reality, that decision happens much sooner than people expect. For you, this means that you should be able to articulate your conclusion and why it matters clearly and quickly when you present your data. And then spend the rest of the time backing up your conclusion with the data. Even if the data you have is inconclusive, then your conclusion should be that there are pluses and minuses to the decision. We're not sure, and here are the key considerations. That's still better than going over the data without framing it with what you want the listener to take from your data. So always lead with the insight. Always think TLDR. Here's the headline, here's the recommendation, not the data. Put the conclusion first in the title, subject line, opening paragraph, opening sentence, and then use the data to back your conclusion up later on and give you credibility. The second insight about communicating data is to know the difference between a conclusion and an insight. A conclusion is a summary of what the data says, how you analyze the data, what you think the data ultimately says. So it could be something like the average of sales in this region is X, or our lead conversion is Y. In contrast, an insight is the decision that we should make from the data. For example, we should increase marketing spend in this region because it's above average sales per lead. Or we should really fix the lead qualification process immediately because currently X% of conversion rate is costing us in lost revenue each quarter. It's not that people don't want the conclusion. It's not that people don't want to know what the data says. They do. It's just that the conclusion of the data has to be embedded in the insight. What people want is first to know the insight, so then when they dive into the data with you, they have a frame of reference for it. So know the difference between conclusion and insight and lead with the insight, go to the conclusion, and then use the data to back up your conclusion. And remember, a conclusion states what the data shows, and an insight interprets the data and explains why it matters and what action to take next. The third tip about presenting data effectively is knowing the role of data. The role of data when you communicate it is to build a convincing argument for your conclusion and your insight. So this is where all the cool details about your data come in handy. What you want to do is walk people through your thought process when you got the data and how you analyze it. So you want to be concise in explaining how the data was obtained, what's the source, what's the sample size, what's the time period, how you analyze it, what's the key method, were there any adjustments or critically any benchmarks that you use to analyze the data. The key is to find the balance between enough detail to give you credibility, but not have too many details that you cause people to drown in them. So here's an example of how the whole process would work. First, you start with an insight. We should double down on region A in marketing spend because it delivers the highest ROI. Great. Why is that? That's the conclusion of the data. The customer acquisition cost in this region is 42% below average, and the conversion rate is 18% above benchmark. And then, why do I say that? This is where you walk through the data. This is the cycle of presenting data. So this order of insight, conclusion, evidence respects the audience's time. It tells the audience why they should be interested before you go into the detail. You want to lean on the advantages of data as a way to convey information. There's a reason why you might use data rather than the other methods of conveying information that I talked about in my previous video. The advantages of data is that data can be verified. It has a paper trail. We know where it came from and how it was collected. Data can also give you not only a conclusion and insight, but also the magnitude of that insight. In other words, I can say that turnover in my company is bad, but with data, I can quantify how bad it is. I can say, is it 15% turnover or is it 40% turnover? Does it cost me 100 grand or does it cost me a million? This quantification is unique to data. No other way of conveying information lets you do this. The final advantage of data is the generalizability. An anecdote can connect emotionally and be vivid, but can be totally misleading. Whereas data can give you the true picture if it's representative of whatever it is you're measuring. You want to focus on the magnitude of the insight, how big it is, how much we should pay attention to it, especially compared to a benchmark. This would really make your presentation especially useful and impactful because the ability to compare is what makes people feel like they've really learned something. So for example, if you say something like our burnout rate is 15%, that's an interesting conclusion. But compare that to our burnout rate is 15%, but our competitor's burnout rate is 30%. That's a lot more impactful because now people can compare and contrast your conclusion to some relevant benchmark. Next, you want to use visuals whenever you can because a picture is worth 1,000 words and 1,000 numbers. But the key is to choose the right visual for the job. You should match your presentation to what you want people to look at in your chart. A visual is like a magnifying glass, and you want to direct people's attention into the key difference or the key color or the key bar or the key line that you think really tells the story. So there's very clear rules of the road here. You don't need to be creative. Most of the points that you get, most of the impact does not come from choosing a snazzy chart or a cool chart or a novel chart. Most of the impact comes from being clear. So here's the roadmap. If you have a comparison between categories, you want to do a bar chart, like simple columns with different colors. If you have trend over time, then you want to do a simple line chart with the time horizon being on the x-axis. If you have a distribution or differences between data points, you just want to use a histogram because that's going to give you the distribution in a very easy to read manner. If you have a relationship between two variables or correlation, you want to use a scatter plot because a scatter plot will show you whether these two things go together or don't go together or go in opposite directions. If you have components of some whole, some big piece, or you want to show how something breaks apart into parts, you want to use a simple pie chart. If you have any kind of location-based or geographical data, you want to use geospatial charts, just like the one I'm showing here. Beyond the simple chart, you want to eliminate anything else because most of it is just going to serve to distract. So you want to remove unnecessary titles, legend, numbers, stars, asterisks, drawings, whatever it is. You just want to keep the basic title, legend, basic numbers. That's enough to understand your chart. The point is to be clear and impactful. The most common mistake is to fall in love with your chart and have too many things on it. You think you're being cute, you think you're investing time and effort, but the reality is it's more likely that you're going to end up muddling your chart and make it less clear and distracting from your main point. There's a name for that that's called chart junk, okay? Most of the templates that you see are not necessary. You don't want heavy grid lines, no 3D effects, no shadows, no decorative icons, no decimal places, unless they're necessary, nothing like that. Color, you want to use color intentionally and accessibly. Use color to highlight the most important thing, not for decoration. Limit yourself to 2 or 3 meaningful colors, no more. You want to make sure these colors have sufficient contrast between them, so it's obvious what you're trying to separate or distinguish between. Okay, so this is how you use data to make effective presentations. As you can see, it involves a lot more than just good analysis, good data collection, good methodology. It involves even more than providing precise and accurate graphs. You have to be able to understand your audience and construct your story with the data, understand the role of data in speech, in communication. So I hope this is helpful. If you think this content is valuable, please hit the like, hit the subscribe, and share this content with people you think need to hear it. Until next time, see you later.